Imagine your coworker borrows your favorite pen off your desk. Again, after you have specifically asked them not to.
Right. It's so frustrating.
Objectively, to an outside observer, it is absolutely no big deal. I mean, it is a $3 piece of plastic.
Exactly. It's just a pen.
So why is your heart racing? Like, why are your fists clenching? Why is your brain screaming that you are in actual physical danger, leaving you sitting there wondering if you are, like, completely losing your mind?
Well, it is an incredibly common and, frankly, deeply uncomfortable human experience. We are conditioned to measure the validity of our emotional reactions by the external size of an event.
Right, so we look at the pen and think we have no right to be this upset.
Precisely. But that external measurement leaves us feeling entirely unmoored when a seemingly tiny interaction triggers this massive internal alarm system.
So our mission today for this deep dive is to decode a framework titled Boundary, Consent, and Escalation.
It's a really fascinating piece of work.
It totally is. We have a stack of material here that tears the lid off the hidden mechanics of everyday interactions. We are going to prove why these small boundary violations actually feel so huge to you.
And we'll map out the exact, invisible structure of how these seemingly trivial moments spiral out of control.
Because the foundational principle here completely reorients how we're taught to think about human interaction.
Yes. The source establishes that a boundary is not defined by how large or small an action appears from the outside.
Right.
The visual scale of the event is entirely irrelevant. A boundary is defined strictly by whether a person's autonomy, personal space, or expressed limit is respected.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to truly understand how a minor overstep turns into a major conflict, we really have to look at the anatomy of an escalation.
Yeah, there is a very specific 7-step structural pattern that happens right beneath the surface of these interactions.
Instead of just listing them out, let's walk through what this actually looks like in real life. Let's go back to that coworker at your desk.
Okay, the pen thief.
Exactly. They reach over and grab something you've asked them not to touch. That is step one. A boundary is crossed.
And your immediate response is step 2. You express discomfort or you set a limit. You say, hey, please don't move things on my desk.
You're using your words.
Right. You are in a communicative state. You're trying to offer data to the other person about how to interact with you safely.
But then comes step 3, which is where everything goes completely off the rails. Minimization.
Ah, yes, the classic brush off.
Right. The coworker rolls their eyes and says, chill out. It's just a pen. It's not a big deal.
Which is so common.
When I was reading through the material on this specific step, a visual immediately popped into my head.
Oh, yeah. What was it?
When someone says it's not a big deal to a boundary you just set, it's like a building inspector looking at a massive structural crack in the foundation of your house.
Okay, I'm with you.
And instead of calling a crew to fix it, they just hand you a roll of wallpaper and tell you to cover it up.
That is such a great analogy, because what's fascinating here is how that analogy really extends. You put up the wallpaper, and visually the problem seems gone.
Right. It looks fine on the surface.
But the house keeps settling. The structural flaw remains. A few weeks later, the door frames start sticking. The windows won't close.
Because the foundation is still broken.
Exactly. And eventually, a strong wind blows, and the entire wall caves in. We often treat minimization, someone brushing off our concern, as a neutral response.
Like they're just trying to keep the peace.
Right. But it is never neutral. It actually functions as an implicit validation of the harmful behavior.
Right. By calling the boundary violation not a problem, they are actively validating their own right to keep doing it. They are telling you the structural crack doesn't matter.
And because that pressure to change the behavior has been entirely removed by their minimization, we hit step 4. The behavior repeats.
They take the pen again the next day.
Which immediately triggers step 5. Your internal sense of being respected just plummets. You provided clear data about your limits, they visually wallpapered over it, and they repeated the action anyway.
Which perfectly explains step 6, your emotional and physiological activation spikes. Your body realizes that the wallpaper didn't stop the house from collapsing.
The structural safety is gone.
Exactly. Your heart rate goes up, your muscles tense, and that pushes us right into the final stage, step 7. The interaction fundamentally shifts from communication to pure protection.
You are no longer trying to explain why the pen matters. You are just bracing for impact.
Yeah, that shift from communication to protection is paramount. It really explains why a repeated small offense feels like a giant threat.
Because your nervous system isn't reacting to the pen anymore. It is reacting to the collapse of the relationship's structural integrity.
And this highlights a critical distinction we have to make. I mean, there is a massive structural difference between validating an action, and understanding its impact.
Oh, absolutely. We use these two words interchangeably all the time in everyday conversation. But they are completely different mechanisms.
Right.
They operate on entirely different tracks. Validation means treating a behavior as acceptable, permissible, or, not requiring any change.
You are basically giving the behavior a green light.
Yes. Understanding, on the other hand, means recognizing the impact a behavior has on another person and adjusting your actions accordingly. Healthy interaction requires understanding without validating the harmful behavior.
Let's put that into a concrete scenario for the listener. If someone steps on your foot and you say, ouch, and they respond with, well, it was just a light tap, it's not a big deal.
Then they are validating their action, they are treating their behavior as permissible.
Right. But if they say, oh, I see I'm standing too close to you, I'll take a step back, they are showing understanding.
Yeah.
They are adjusting to your limit without needing to validate their original misstep.
Notice the mechanics of that second response. They don't have to agree with your pain threshold. They don't need to feel the same physical sensation you do.
They just have to understand that their action had a negative impact on you and adjust.
Exactly. A person can understand an impact without validating the action that caused it.
But come on, let me play devil's advocate for a second. Are people really sitting around maliciously plotting to validate harm?
Like they're doing it on purpose.
Yeah. I mean, when your coworker minimizes taking your pen, are they actively trying to diminish your autonomy and assert dominance? That feels a bit like a cartoon villain to me.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of how human beings operate, it is rarely about cartoonish malice, at least initially.
Okay.
Individuals are heavily conditioned toward efficiency and control. We are wired to prioritize our own convenience over deep relational awareness.
Sure, that makes sense.
If borrowing the pen is the fastest way for your coworker to write down a phone number, their default setting is simply, what is easiest for me right now? They dismiss non-functional concerns.
So it's just conditioned ignorance, really, a byproduct of a busy environment.
Initially, yes. However, the text draws a very sharp line here. While the first action might be conditioned ignorance, the issue fundamentally transforms if the behavior continues after awareness is given.
I think.
If you explicitly express the boundary and they make no adjustment whatsoever, it crosses a threshold. It is no longer simple ignorance. It becomes active disregard.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because when that active disregard happens, our bodies do not just sit back and take notes for later.
Not at all.
They react immediately in very visceral ways.
Mm.
If someone is ignoring your boundary just out of mere convenience because it's efficient for them, why does your physical body react as if you were standing on the edge of a cliff?
This brings in the principle of nervous system recognition. The body does not simply evaluate the external scale of an event.
It doesn't look at a stolen pen, calculate its monetary value, and assign a proportionally small emotional response.
Right. Instead, the nervous system acts as a highly sophisticated pattern recognition engine.
It's completely bypassing the object and looking exclusively at the underlying structure of the interaction.
Precisely. When a boundary is repeatedly ignored, the nervous system registers a very specific, dangerous pattern. It thinks, I am not being respected.
Or, more urgently, my no is not being honored.
Yes. That underlying architecture is what the body is evaluating, not the desk supplies.
This connects directly to the broader concept of consent. I mean, we usually reserve the word consent for extreme, high-stakes situations.
We do, but really, consent is just a general structure for daily life. It governs how we navigate every single interaction.
Consent simply means a person's expressed no is respected without being overridden, negotiated down, or ignored.
Which means non-consent appears in our everyday lives in incredibly mundane ways. It is the dismissal of express limits, continuing a behavior after an objection, or even reframing someone else's issue as insignificant.
So someone moving your belongings after you've asked them not to sit on the exact same spectrum as a severe violation of personal autonomy.
It does. The external severity, the visual damage, differs wildly, of course, but they exist on the exact same spectrum because they share identical DNA.
The active disregard of express limits.
Exactly. And this should be incredibly validating for you, the listener. If you have ever felt a massive internal spike over a seemingly trivial boundary violation, your reaction is not irrational.
Not at all.
If you have any prior experiences of deeper violations, whether you experience them directly or just witness them, this pattern of my no is not being honored activates the exact same internal alarms.
Because your body is doing its job beautifully. It is a highly tuned instrument recognizing a familiar, dangerous structure.
Right. It's seeing the shadow of a much larger threat because the silhouette is exactly the same.
Internal activation does not always equal external equivalence.
Yeah.
You might be sweating over a stapler, but your body is sweating because it recognizes a survival threat.
It is your survival mechanism stepping in saying, I know this framework, and historically, this framework leads to harm.
So, since our nervous systems are tracking these patterns so closely and sounding the alarm the moment our no is overridden, how do we actually handle this in real time?
It's a great question.
How do we intervene before our bodies hijack us and force us into full-blown protection mode, where we are just running on adrenaline and snapping at people?
Well, this raises an important point about our cultural views on intervention. We often feel we have to wait for something terrible to happen before we are allowed to speak up.
We don't want to make a fuss.
Exactly. But if a pattern matches the structure of known harmful escalation, it is entirely reasonable and necessary to intervene early.
Catching it early doesn't mean you're a pessimist. You aren't assuming your coworker is a monster or that the absolute worst-case scenario is definitely going to happen.
Right, you are just recognizing a structural reality.
If the foundation is cracking and you only use wallpaper, the wall will eventually fall. Escalation is inevitable if the structure remains unchanged.
Early enforcement is simply the interruption of a pattern before it has the chance to develop into a crisis. And to manage this effectively, we have to recognize a vital internal threshold.
What does it look like?
There's a line we cross internally during these escalations. Before that threshold, your internal state is communicative. You are thinking, I can explain this to them. If I just find the right words, they will understand.
You're still trying to pass them data, but once you realize they aren't listening to the data,
The threshold is crossed. Your internal state shifts entirely to, I need to protect myself.
wow.
The moment a person no longer feels safe to communicate, the interaction has already degraded beyond a simple misunderstanding. The structural integrity of the relationship in that specific moment is gone.
So once safety evaporates, communication becomes completely ineffective, and enforcement becomes your only viable tool.
Exactly.
We generally see two very different systems for handling this threshold in everyday life.
Yeah.
Reaction versus enforcement.
Yeah.
A system based on reaction is what most of us do by default. We wait. We let the small violations pile up. We tolerate the minimization. We push down the physiological spikes until our emotional capacity is entirely maxed out.
And then we explode.
Right. The response is delayed, sudden, intense, and usually misinterpreted by everyone around us because they're only seeing the final explosion over a pen. They didn't see the 50 structural cracks that led to it.
Reaction occurs in the aftermath of your emotional capacity being exceeded. It is inherently chaotic.
But enforcement is different.
Very different. Enforcement occurs much earlier, long before you hit that breaking point. Enforcement is executed with clarity and consistency. It defines limits and consequences without requiring an emotional overflow.
A system built on enforcement creates predictability. It establishes clarity, and it drastically reduces your need for a chaotic, explosive response.
Absolutely.
So what does this all mean for you? How do you actually build this system of enforcement in your daily life without sounding like a robot or, a dictator?
The framework provides a brilliant blueprint for what it calls a clean boundary statement.
A complete functional boundary requires three specific elements: clarity, consistency, and consequence. Let's really dig into what this sounds like in practice, because this is where the rubber meets the road.
Let's apply it to a very common scenario. Say you have a manager who constantly texts you about non-urgent work matters and at 9 o'clock at night.
Perfect. Let's run it through the three elements. Element one is clarity. You cannot be vague. You cannot hint. Clarity means stating exactly what the limit is.
Right.
You say, I do not check or respond to work messages after 6 p.m. Notice what isn't there. There's no apology. There's no long-winded explanation about your sleep schedule. It is just the limit.
Then comes element 2, consistency. This is where most boundaries fail.
Oh, definitely.
The next night, the boss texts at 9 p.m. If you reply and say, hey, just this once, here's the file, but remember, I don't work late, you have destroyed the boundary.
You really have. Consistency means the limit remains immovable. It is not negotiated down based on their urgency.
Which naturally leads to the most important element, consequence. A boundary without a consequence is just a preference.
There has to be a change in access or interaction if the limit is disregarded. In the boss scenario, the consequence isn't punishing them or sending an angry reply.
No.
The consequence is simply muting the notifications and not answering until 9 a.m. You restrict access. Clarity, consistency, consequence.
Let's look at how this applies in a personal setting, which is honestly often much harder. Say you have a family member who drops by your house unannounced, expecting to be entertained.
Okay, so the clarity step is telling them, I love seeing you, but I need you to text and ask before coming over. I am not available for unannounced visits.
The consistency step means when they inevitably show up unannounced anyway, you do not let them inside. You do not validate the behavior by saying, well, since you're already here, come in.
And the consequence step is answering the door, holding the knob, and saying, now isn't a good time, like I mentioned. Let's plan for Tuesday, and then you close the door.
It feels incredibly harsh the first time you do it, but it is the only way to establish structural safety.
And here is the most liberating part of this entire framework. It is the ultimate release valve for anyone who struggles with people-pleasing. A complete boundary does not require the other person's deep understanding.
That is so crucial.
Let me repeat that, because it goes against everything society teaches us about interpersonal communication. A boundary does not require their understanding.
We waste massive amounts of emotional energy trying to make the other person understand why we feel the way we do. We write essays in our heads.
We really do. We think, if they just understand my psychology, if they understand my childhood, they will finally stop crossing the line.
But understanding is merely ideal. Compliance is sufficient.
Yes.
You do not need them to deeply comprehend your inner world. You do not need their validation. You just need them to stop the behavior.
Compliance is sufficient. That takes an unbelievable amount of pressure off your shoulders.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a master debater. You don't have to be a trained therapist to hold a limit.
You just need the behavior to stop, so your nervous system can finally register safety again.
You don't owe anyone a thesis defense on why you don't want your stapler moved.
Exactly. If we connect all of these distinct mechanisms, the escalation sequence, the trap of minimization, the pattern recognition of the nervous system, and the mechanics of early enforcement, we gain a highly coherent, actionable framework for why everyday interactions can feel so fraught.
More importantly, it gives us a roadmap to navigate them with agency, rather than just reacting out of sheer exhaustion.
Yes, it puts the control back in your hands.
It really synthesizes into a few major paradigm-shifting takeaways. First, small violations matter deeply. They aren't trivial because they build the framework and establish the patterns that allow for larger violations.
Right.
Second, when someone minimizes your boundary, when they tell you to chill out or that it's no big deal, they aren't just being dismissive. They are actively validating the harm and removing their own need to change.
And third, your boundary does not need to be justified by some extreme worst-case scenario to be considered legitimate.
A boundary becomes valid the exact fraction of a second it is clearly expressed and not respected. You do not have to wait for a disaster to enforce it.
Using early enforcement, applying clarity, consistency, and consequence saves your emotional capacity. It creates predictability in your relationships, and it stops the pattern of disregard long before it triggers your body's deepest, most chaotic survival responses.
Which leaves me with a final thought for you to mull over today. If our nervous systems are intricately designed to process the minimization of boundaries as a genuine physical threat, literally tracking the pattern of my no is not honored the same way it tracks a predator in the bushes. What is the long-term impact on our collective physical health?
It's a sobering question.
Think about the society we live in, the fast-paced workplaces we navigate, the digital landscapes we interact with every single day. We live in environments where small boundary violations, constant interruptions, and ruthless efficiencies are not just normalized. They are celebrated and rewarded.
Yeah, they really are.
If our physical bodies are constantly treating these small, normalized dismissals as structural threats, pumping adrenaline into our veins over unseen dangers, how much of our modern exhaustion is simply the physical cost of living in a world that constantly tells us our boundaries are not a big deal? Think about that.